Andre from the High Performance Academy, and we're here with Yiannis from Plex Tuning. Now, we found out when we interviewed Yiannis earlier about his knock monitor system that he's a kind of a big deal in the Greek tuning industry. He's known as the doctor, I believe, and we wanted to just catch up with Yiannis a little bit more detail and talk about his tuning career. So, Yiannis, thanks for joining us again. I'll start with, how did you get into tuning?
I got a couple of friends that were interested in cars or driving them fast. This got me interested into cars as well. The first thing I did was I wanted to learn how to make my car faster, and then I tuned a friend's car and then another friend's, and that's how it all started maybe 18 years ago. And eventually turned into a business, and I was tuning ECUs using various dynamometers for performance shops. And a few years later, I started my own company and shop with in-house dynamometer.
Let's go back a little bit. 18 years, that's a fair while in the industry. When you got involved, were you talking carburetors back then, or has it always been EFI for you?
No, it's always been EFI, yes. Yep, starting point.
How have you seen the technology that's available to us as tuners change over the last 18 years?
A lot have changed. It's much easier now. It's easier to get information from the internet. It's not always the correct information. You have to go to books and learn from people who have the experience also. And start with the basics, not performance tuning. Start with internal combustion engine. But the tools are now much better. The ECUs are better. Our job is easier, but the vehicle performances have gone much higher, and the expectations are also higher.
There's one thing I've seen, I guess, from my own experience. I got into this maybe 12 or 14 years ago, and back then, I started out with naturally aspirated engines that didn't really make much power. So the challenges back then, it was a lot easier, and you really would have had to have done something pretty dumb to damage the engine. These days, guys are coming into the tuning industry with little experience, and straight away they're getting involved with cars with sort of 500, 600, 800 horsepower. And the challenges of those sort of cars are dramatically higher than a naturally aspirated engine. Is that fair to say?
Yes, they are. It's more difficult to damage a naturally aspirated engine. You can still damage it, but it's much more difficult. Almost from the beginning, I worked with turbocharged engines. Not that I was not involved with naturally aspirated, but that was where people didn't have knowledge, and I found out that I could offer solutions. Yes, many of the early cars and engines that I worked on used piggyback ECUs and additional injector controllers. But then as horsepower got higher, we started fitting aftermarket ECUs, which were not doing very well at the beginning. Difficult to tune, but eventually everything worked out.
In terms of those ECUs that you're seeing in commonplace in Greece, what are the common brands that people are fitting?
Common brands. I've worked a lot with DTA ECUs from the UK, Motec. I've worked with Haltech. I've worked with Link ECUs from the very first LEM1 ECUs, and what else do I do? EFI technology from Italy is very common, and lately we've seen some more brands like Cyvex, a UK company, and they have a good ECU that's being used a lot. And what else do we have? Otronic, of course. Yes, I forgot about Otronic. Yes, Otronic was in the Greek market early on. We have many cars with Otronics.
Have you got a favorite one of those brands that you really prefer tuning over another?
let's say, a favorite might be the one I would tune more easily. Uh, if that could be the Vipec or Link, it would take me the least amount of time to tune a car with that ECU. There are other ECUs that have the same capabilities or even more. So you can say Motec can have more capabilities, but it will take a longer time. Or the Civics will have more capabilities, but it will take a longer time to tune.
So the complexity is an issue there.
It depends on what you are after, yes. And the DTA ECUs are very simple. The capabilities are not up to the other ones I mentioned, but you can tune them and get a good result very fast.
Let's just go back a little bit. So you had an interest in cars and you're tuning cars for your friends. How did you sort of build up your own knowledge of tuning in your own experience? Were there any particular books that you found useful? Were there any courses you took, or was it just through trial and error?
Yes, I studied as a mechanical engineer, and at the beginning I was reading every book available on performance tuning and on internal combustion engines in general. I also got an interest in electronics. The theory was easy for me. I don't know why, but I could apply it, and I never really had any problems going forward with things. It was just about studying and applying. Yes.
Let's talk about the tuning industry in Greece. I mean, it's something I've never been to Greece. I don't know what sort of industry you've got over there. So what sort of cars are you modifying mainly, and what sort of forms of motorsport are popular in Greece?
Yes, we have almost all forms of motorsport. We have rally racing, track racing, have hill climbing, and drag racing. But they're not very big, so you will not have a drag racing championship with more than, let's say, 80 cars participating, or maybe if there's a race near the capital, Athens, where anybody can enter the car for the drag race, you can have 200 cars. But it's the same for the rally circuit, not many cars racing, but a lot of people used to race on the street. Now they don't do it so much because it's more difficult. It's easier to get caught. The fines, you can be fined more, and people have come to realize that it's not the right thing to do.
Is there a particular type of motorsport that you prefer tuning for? Something that maybe you find more challenging than another that really gets you thinking, gets you out of the square?
I say rally racing is interesting because you have to compromise for the reliability of the engine, and you also have to work a lot on the drivability, because dragster is easier usually. You just have a narrow RPM band that you have to work on, and almost nothing else than full throttle matters.
Let's go back to that rally driving or tuning for a rally application then. So you say you're concentrating on reliability and compromising maybe engine power. What do you exactly mean by that? What are you doing in the tune to get that reliability?
It's a small compromise, but when you have a racer, then he wants the most power possible out of the engine. You have to be able to be confident and be close to that power, but still know that the engine will last. That means having your air fuel ratios perfect, and be really sure that the engine will not detonate. Not on the dyno, but at the race, because on the dyno it will be on load for 15 seconds, but at the race it will be on load for a long time, and temperatures might be different. So you cannot, the maximum power on the dyno is not the maximum allowable power at the race.
So in terms of that, I understand what you're saying there. I see the same with our own tuning. In terms of that, are you detuning the car while it's still on the dyno, or do you take the car from the dyno and then confirm that tune out on the road with the driver in a proper competition environment?
We have done both. Usually, I don't try to detune it. I just try to create the conditions on the dyno that the car would see at the race. So I might put the car on steady state, full power at RPM for many seconds to see what the water temperature does, the oil temperature does, and account for that. And I do things that I wouldn't do when normally tuning an engine. Or the same thing I would do if I was tuning an engine for maximum speed attempt.
I think that's one of the challenges with dyno tuning, and I have the same problem myself, is a single pull on the dyno, which may be 10 or 12 seconds, doesn't really get the load into the engine that it could see on the road or track where it's under that constant sort of full power running gear after gear, for minutes on end. So it can be useful to do those long extended runs and really load the engine up and see what's going to happen. In terms of once you've got the car off the dyno and it's actually in competition, are you relying on data logging to help you with your tuning?
Yes, you can rely on data logging. If your dyno is right and your ECU is right and you've got all the compensations dialed in right, you usually don't need to do any more tuning on the road, except from maybe some part throttle and transient tuning. Otherwise, usually you don't need to do anything else.
With the rally cars that you're tuning in Greece, does your class require a turbo inlet restrictor?
Yes, I have done cars with a turbo inlet restrictor. Yes.
How does that affect your tuning strategy? Because with the restrictor, it's obviously there to limit engine power, and often that'll affect what you can do with the boost at high RPM.
And it's not very difficult. You just go to each RPM point and try to get the maximum amount of power for that RPM point, and make sure that boost control is very repeatable. Because if you are right at the limit of what the restrictor and the turbocharger can supply, you don't want to go over that. As soon as you go over that, you lose power and you can also destroy the turbo. So these are the two essential things. Get as much power as you can at each RPM point, and then make sure that the boost control is very accurate and repeatable.
It's one thing I've seen with a lot of turbo rally cars with restrictors, and as you say, the boost, sometimes running more boost will actually result in less power, and tuning that boost curve, particularly at high RPM where the restrictor is really limiting it. If you run too much boost, that turbo can basically cavitate, and all it's doing is pumping heat and no air, and you lose power.
You have to tune each RPM point, or let's say at least every 500 RPM independently. So at 6,000 RPM, you have to see which boost level you can run, the maximum, and the other tuning parameters, and then go to 6,500, and then redo the procedure. Totally different boost level might be needed to get the best results. Usually the boost going down as the RPM goes up, because you are limited by the restrictor, yes, the inlet restrictor.
Thanks a lot for having a chat to us today, Yiannis. It's really interesting to get a perspective on tuning in a different part of the world, and you've got some really interesting stories, so thanks for sharing them with us.
Thank you for coming here.
For online tuning courses, visit learntotune.com.